Hi everyone, this is the time of year we celebrate Earth Day. This year's theme is the Restore the Earth. It's the 51st anniversary, and we have been quite fortunate to be able to assemble a whole series of speakers, eminent speakers, to bring forward some of these messages. The themes we are going to be looking at is climate action involving youth, the biodiversity of Bukit Kiara, which is of course very important to Friends of Bukit Kiara. Looking at community action and what we can do to save greenlands, and finally looking at the whole issue of climate emergency and the kind of efforts which are going on in the country for restoration. The fact that you're here means you care, which is fantastic. So we'd like very much for you to take the next logical step. Come and join us in FOBK or other Greenland organizations you are in contact with, so that you can start to make a difference with us. And you can become citizen scientists, volunteer your services, or very importantly help to raise funds so that we can take this message across to the rest of the country. If you're interested, please look at our contact points below, and don't hesitate to call. We'll be very happy to welcome you. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Vida Herkus, and I'm from the environmental organization Free Tree Society, and I will be moderating tonight's talk, Restoring Our Earth. This is the last webinar of the week-long Restore Our Earth series by Friends of Bukit Kiara and with Think City as well. This was designed to raise awareness and give insight to the public on how to take action to help our planet. If you've missed any of these talks but are interested in watching a recording, these will be made available on the websites on Think City and Friends of Bukit Kiara as well in a few days' time. The format for today is a 15 to 20 minute presentation by each of the speakers, after which we will have time for a Q&A session. For the audience, you are most welcome to post your feedback, any issues, or to ask questions in the chat box, which is to the right of your screen. And we will get to your questions at the end of the presentations. If you do have a question for any of the speakers in particular, do make sure to mention that in your question. Lastly, if you cannot hear or if your screen freezes, please just reload your browser and let's hope that that works. So our two eminent speakers tonight are Dr. Zaiman Zulkifli from Tropical Rainforest Conservation and Research Center and Sophia Costello from Think City, who will be sharing their thoughts on restoring the balance of development with the natural world and what that means in a Malaysian context. So let us crack on by inviting our first speaker onto the virtual stage. Sophia Costello is the lead for environmental resilience at Think City, and tonight she will be talking about the health of our planet. Over to you, Sophia.
Thank you very much, Vida. Good evening, everyone. I'll be talking tonight. I'll be talking about the latest data on science, the latest scientific data regarding the state of our planet, and also the latest pledges and the latest pledges and NDCs from different governments of the world. So first, I will just briefly update on the latest research on planet Earth. I'll mention the main challenges specific for Malaysia. I'll briefly discuss humankind's connection to nature as a very important topic in restoring our Earth. And then I'll list priority initiatives, not only the ones that should be taken on, but also the ones that are being already taken on. So first, an update on planet Earth. All this news are from this month. So unfortunately, after the year of the pandemic year, 2020, we do not see big progress in terms of reductions of carbon emissions or in terms of deforestation. Actually, the World Resources Institute, this information that rainforest destruction has increased by 12% in 2020 when compared to 2019. We also see that this is a study on world's ecosystems, that just 3% of the world's ecosystems remain intact. And we see that whatever the countries are doing in terms of curbing their carbon emissions, it's not really working. And we're heading, we're in April 2021, but we are already in line to have the second highest rate of carbon emissions in the world, in the history this year. So this is very, all of this gives us cause to pause. And we see scientific journals, scientists all over the world, and also journals, again, pushing for world governments to declare a climate emergency. So this was last year in January, before the pandemic kicked in and everyone was locked in their homes. So we saw 11,000 scientists from 153 countries declaring the climate emergency. And then this led countries, governments, and institutions like the World Economic Forum to push for a global green recovery as a consequence of the pandemic. We have also seen increased polarization between urban areas and natural areas. So we know that urban areas are going to be very vulnerable because they will have the biggest percentage of the world population. They already have most of the world population, but this trend is on track to continue. And also we see that natural areas that are securing major ecosystem services that are essential for the survival of the planet. We also see studies that this is a very recent study that revealed that humans' impact on the planet is not so much on the humans themselves, but on the overexploitation of resources. I'll get back to this issue later on. So the major challenges for Malaysia are very clear. In terms of mitigation, it's very clear. The energy mix in Malaysia is 93% of fossil fuels based. There is low use of public transportation, and there's a very high percentage of irrecoverable carbons in ecosystems, such as rainforests or mangrove forests. In terms of adaptation, the country is very exposed to climate impacts due to its location. It has a very high percentage of vulnerable communities. There is no real preparedness for climate impacts yet. So obviously, the location near the equator and in Southeast Asia is very sensitive. Southeast Asia is one of the 3 regions in the world which will be hardest hit by climate impacts in the near future. Urban areas are also particularly at risk from extreme heat. In terms of climate change performance, you can see in this index, in this CCPI index, that Malaysia is one of the countries in the world with the lowest performance. In terms of SDGs, we can see that it ranks 60 out of 193 countries. For regional context, you can see that Thailand is number 41 and Vietnam 49. In terms of goal 13 of the SDGs, climate action, the country is not performing well at all. You can see here that it's on the red in terms of energy-related emissions. So the strongest challenges Malaysia faces at this moment and in the near future are heat stress, increased extreme weather events, reduced crop yields and increased food costs, coastal flooding, and regional instability with increased number of migrants, internally displaced people, and refugees. The country also has some specific advantages, such as the high potential for increasing climate performance, the availability of international funding due to developing status. Obviously, this international funding is available for assisting in achieving goals in mitigation and adaptation as well. And last but not least, very high natural capital. So Malaysia is one of the world's mega diverse countries. It has 20% of the world's animal species, which is very impressive. We need to keep repeating this, that more than half of the global GDP, so $42 trillion, depends on high functioning biodiversity. This is something that is missing in almost all the world's economic reports, but this is something that must be stressed. These ecosystem services cannot be left unnoticed. The country has extensive areas of rainforest, obviously, and some of the most biodiverse mangrove forests in the world. All of this importance of natural capital needs to be framed in our very peculiar relation and connection to nature. So humankind has been destroying nature at a progressively faster pace. It's heartbreaking to see our impact on biodiversity. 200 species go extinct every single day. 97% of all mammals on Earth today are humans, cows, and pets. And 70% of all birds on Earth today are chicken. So the Anthropocene is in full display in biodiversity. We are transforming the habitats and the other life forms around us just to support our needs. This is obviously because we think humankind thinks it's separated from nature. There's this illusion, and this is illusion very entrenched in culture. The three monotheistic religions share the same creation myth, which is the expulsional paradise, which is basically a myth of a metaphor for separation from nature. This is in full display in the 19th century when The Origin of Species by Darwin was published. So at this point, we're talking about mid-19th century, medicine was quite developed. So everyone knew our organs were very similar to other animals' organs, particularly mammals. But when Darwin published this book, there was a huge shock in society because people could not believe that we shared our origin with other animals. This is how far this notion of separation from nature is. Despite this illusion of separation from nature, there are always fears present. This is very clear in King Kong, in which man goes into the jungle, but the jungle strikes back at man at the heart of man's territory, the city. I don't think it's possible for us to restore the earth or to shift in our ways of behaving without rethinking our connection to nature. We need to understand that we are completely a product of the earth systems, complex systems, and we need to safeguard them not for the sake of the animals or of the trees, but for the sake of ourselves, who are fully dependent and integrated with the other earth beings. So in terms of, now back to the restoring the earth and to the priority initiatives, first of all, we need to understand the earth global system, and it's a very complex system. It has four spheres: the geosphere, the hydrosphere, the atmosphere, and the biosphere. And each of these spheres functions in a very different timeline. Geosphere has processes that function in the order of millennia. It's the slowest sphere. Then the atmosphere and the hydrosphere, they interact, generating climate. Actually, climate is a result of some processes of the atmosphere and the hydrosphere. And these are physical processes that carry substantial inertia. So it takes a long time for some of these processes to fully manifest. One such example is, for instance, sea level rise. We all know that this is going to take some time. This is not an immediate process. Finally, the biosphere, where we are located, is the fastest sphere. So everything changes very fast. So when you think about climate change, this is where the first impacts are going to come. We're going to see impacts in the biosphere before in any other sphere. And we are already seeing them. 200 species going extinct every single day. It's such example. The pandemic is another example. Don't think that this pandemic is completely separated. It's a completely different issue from climate change, because it's not. It's actually deeply connected. To address all these issues, the UN has launched a decade for ecosystem restoration. It was initiated 4 months ago, so it's supposed to last from 2021 to 2030. And it's very timely, because obviously we absolutely must protect ecosystems that support our livelihoods. And this is just a recent announcement from the French. We can always count on the French to surprise everyone. This is actually very, very welcome. They've announced that they're going to fine greenwashing. It would be wonderful if the Malaysian government would announce this as well. What does this mean? This means that, for instance, if a company like Nestle wants to do a campaign in France saying that they are going carbon neutral, while they are contributing to deforestation because of palm oil, France will fine the company. And this not only works in terms of damaging, reducing their initiatives in greenwashing, but also in sharing the knowledge about these activities of these organizations. So this is a very recent event, the Climate Summit by the Biden administration. It happened on the 22nd and 23rd of April, and it was very, very interesting. The US has pledged to cut US emissions by half by 2030 compared to 2005. And this is very ambitious. There's no comparison between this and the previous administration, obviously. And it's very important because very important to have the US back in climate action, because not they still have all over the world, but because they are the top producer of both oil and natural gas. They are the country most responsible for carbon emissions in historical terms. So historical emissions, they're number one. And their citizens still have a very high carbon footprint, roughly 3 times the global average. However, I've been all weekend seeing all scientists analyzing the pledges. What they are promising here is not enough to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. However, there's one thing we as humans do very well, which is to set targets and improve on these targets progressively. This is actually almost a factory line kind of process. And so I have, if no outlier election and we have another Trump 4 years from now, I do expect the US to very soon be on track in terms of the Paris Agreement goals. So their priorities, I'm just highlighting 2 of the priorities announced on April 23rd, because they are aligned with our goals in Malaysia. So the first, scaling up international financing to address climate needs and doubling climate finance to developing countries. Out of this pledge, they highlight that they will triple the adaptation finance by 2024. And it's very important because Malaysia really needs to step up in adaptation. Think City's climate, nature-based climate adaptation program for the urban areas of the Penang Island is still the only municipal climate adaptation program to have been developed for Malaysia. And we need to start extending programs like this to many other cities. The second goal they've announced that is of special interest to us is the implementation of nature-based solutions. So they intend to invest in tropical forests in order to halt deforestation. This is very welcome by everyone attending this webinar, I'm sure. And they want to mobilize at least 1 billion to incentivize tropical and subtropical countries to reduce emissions from forests. And obviously funding nature-based approaches to coastal community and ecosystem resilience. So even though the US does not, this pledge from the US is ambitious, but it's not enough to achieve the Paris Agreement. China's 2060 pledge is consistent with 1.5 degrees. So we're not that off track. It's still, at this moment, it's still possible for us to achieve our goals. We need to be alert because not everything is as it seems. And this is a huge, right now, this is a very hot topic in climate. There is this goal to protect 30% of the Earth by 2030. It's called the 30-30 agenda. And everyone, I would say even months from now, yeah. Everyone until very recently, everyone was on board of this idea. And suddenly we had a campaign from Survival International that are calling this the big green lie. And they are saying that this is a strategy, again, a strategy that is similar to postmodernist colonization. So colonization by capitalism, by financial power instead of property ownership. So what they say is that this 30 by 30, protecting 30% of the Earth, is aiming at the areas that have native people inhabiting these areas. And this, when I looked through their documentation, it makes sense. So basically what I want to highlight here is that there are many issues that are complex in the climate change field, and we need to be careful. We cannot look, we cannot analyze these issues without searching deeper and understanding the complexities of the systems better. So, and this, supporting this, what can we do as individuals? It's it's pretty clear by now that we need to demand action from elected officials. It's not going to be me or you individually that are going to change the energy mix of Malaysia from 93% from fossil fuels to 4%, right? It's going to be, it has to be the government. Second, we should reduce consumption, not of one specific item, not of red meat or not of oil or gas. We need to reduce consumption in general. We should, there are studies that say that people should have maximum one child because of carbon footprints, obviously, and overpopulation. We should support local communities because they are major drivers of local resilience. And then finally, we need to make informed choices. Again, as I was saying with the 30-30 agenda, we need to look at the issues in more detail in order to make the most informed choices we can. So thank you very much. Back to you, Baida.
Thank you, Sophia, for that wake-up
Seems we're having a little bit of a technical problem with Bida's feed. So maybe we just move straight on to our second speaker while we wait for Bida to sort it out. Simon Zulkifli carried out his PhD at the Institute for Evolution Biology, and I'm not quite sure what that second word is. Maybe you can tell me what it is.
Environmental science.
Environmental science at the University of Zurich. And he is with TRCRC. Perhaps you could just give yourself a short introduction and then take it away with your presentation. Then hopefully Bida will be able to come back for the Q&A a bit later on. Sure. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much for the introduction. Maybe I'll just kind of dive in and straight away kind of introduce the work we do at TRCRC and what we do in Malaysia. So thank you very much to FOBK actually for inviting us and having us on board to share a little bit of our work. And thanks to Sophia for as well setting the scene and setting the stage, the global stage. And what we do right now is we'll dive into the Malaysian context and see what we're doing in Malaysia and what can be done in Malaysia in terms of restoration. So TRCRC, we were formed in 2012, primarily focusing on restoration and safeguarding endangered tree species. We then expanded into kind of restoring and trying to meet the achievements of our national targets that we have set about, where I'll talk about in a bit. We have 4 major programs at TRCRC. The first one is the TRLCs, which is our living collections. Another one is finding economic models to sustain sustainable forests. It's called FNE. The Central Forest Spine Initiative is an initiative looking at habitat connectivity within Peninsular Malaysia. And our most recent project we have is People for Peat, which looks into sustainable livelihoods on peatlands. So what we'll do right now today is basically be talking about restoration opportunities, so more on the CFS related work that we do. It's called the Central Forest Spine Initiative. So before we dive into what we do, let's have a look at what's the problems. So what we have is Malaysia is quite a lot of forested areas and tree covered areas being slowly converted to major oil crops, to meet global demand. And what we have is mostly of the forests in the highlands, which are safeguarded by the sheer topography of the area. So from 2001 to 2017, the Global Forest Watch, which is this online platform, shared or have this interactive map that showcase the amount of tree cover lost within Malaysia. And what we had from 2001 to 2017 was about close to 7.29 million hectares. But we also see tree cover gain. And so from 2001 to 2012, there was about 2.6 million hectares. So this was most likely some of these degraded areas being covered up. What we've done is we also looked into other data which has been published and looked into kind of our local data sets. And what we see here is that from 2007 to 2016, the loss of forest cover has contributed to close to about 33 million tons of carbon dioxide per year within the years of 2007 to 2016. And so there is a large amount of area which has been degraded. So we went from 2.79 to about 13.72 forest area in Peninsular Malaysia, having less than being degraded, so basically less than its carrying capacity. So what we see here is huge potential for this area to be restored, to be able to reabsorb it, as long as the land use isn't changed. So as long as you don't degazette and convert these forests into other sort of land uses, such as agricultural towns, these areas can then still recover, which we will talk about in the next few slides. Similarly, a study in Sabah and Sarawak showcased that actually only about 8% and 3% of land areas in Sabah and Sarawak are covered by intact forests. So what we have is actually a lot of degraded areas. Mostly our forest cover is in this orange and red area, which is actually has been kind of harvested. So what you have is really a reduction in biomass in some of these areas. So in what we do in TRCRC is we try to merge all our emerging initiatives, our plans that we have, which is drawn up by international kind of targets. And so we have really good policies on biodiversity, which was recently launched in 2016. We have a national strategy for plant conservation. We have the Central Forest Pine Initiative, and we have our own red lists for different plants that we have. And so how do we then kind of get these documents off the bookshelf and actually implement it on the ground? So that's actually a very difficult thing. A lot of land in Malaysia, most of the land in Malaysia, forest in Malaysia is state governed. And so each state needs to develop and execute these plans if they wish to. And so they're not held to responsible for actually executing federal plans. So what needs to be done is we need to kind of develop incentives and develop strategies to make this achievement kind of reached. So within Peninsula Malaysia, one of the biggest conservation strategy was developed about 10 years ago is the Central Forest Pine Initiative, CFS, which aims to connect the north all the way down to the south with all these red and blue areas. So in red is primary linkages, and in secondary linkages, and in blue is primary linkages where forests just meet one another. Forest in red is a slightly more condensed area where you have different sort of plantation land use within those areas. And it's a great ambition, but actually what needs to be done is actually quite complicated. You need to gazette the area, you need to then look into the status of the area, and you need to develop strategies how to maintain that area as pristine as possible. Which brings us to our type of forest that we work on. So predominantly in TRCRC, we work on lowland forests, the Dipterocarpaceae dominant forest in this area. It's dominated by this single family of trees, which is center of diversity is in Borneo. We have close to about 290 or so, and they have really interesting reproductive biology. They only fruit and flower every 5 to 7 years. So gaining restoration material needs to be very far-sighted, planned and thought through in order to get the correct planting material. Here we are talking about forests, just go back, which has as much as about close to about 300 different species in a single hectare, as compared to maybe the UK, which has only about 30 native species in the entire United Kingdom. So we need to basically be restoring this area with the highest diversity if you're wanting to achieve kind of that stable state, which most of these forests were previously in. So most of these forests, most of these trees are actually red listed. Out of the range of species that we have, about 51% of them are threatened nationwide. 22 of them are endemic in Peninsula Malaysia, and 15 are critically endangered. And so we have actually one species which is now extinct in Malaysia, but still occurs in Indonesia. But so not only animals are red listed, trees are very much red listed, and they are kind of like difficult to manage and have very difficult reproductive systems. And we need to actively manage this if we're gonna be continuing to have a stable system. So what we do is we start off with the Peninsula Red List. We develop distribution maps on where some of these species are, and we develop spatial analysis to look into where these areas can be restored and what kind of strategy can be done. And we then look out for different potential interests in different states, how these different states want to take on some of these initiatives. Within Perak, we've worked very closely in Perak. We have also been funded by the Habitat Foundation to start up nurseries within Orang Asli communities. And it's very, very, very pleasant to see that they can really take up some of these tasks very, very easily. And so do follow our news on TRCRC on some of this progress on how we're going to work with indigenous communities as we roll out. And within the entire Perak, since 2016-2018, we've collected close to 18,000 seedlings from 57 different surveys and collections throughout the state. We had about 89 different species marked out for future collection, and 34 of those are within the red list. So this was funded by the Yayasan Hazana, which was really great to kickstart this initiative in Perak. And so from there, we managed to gain that momentum. When thinking about restoration, it's very important to think about the seedlings and seed sources. What we want to do is collect from a range of different habitats so that each species that we get has a really good genetic representation from different habitats. You do not want to be collecting from a single area which might be adapted to only a single sort of environment. So what we do is we develop these threat maps that showcase how threatened some of these forests are, where we see there's increased tree cover loss. There's areas which have been kind of utilized, forests which have been utilized, and those areas we pay focus on to collect trees and genetic material from those forests in order to safeguard them, just in case they're over collected, unharvested. So once we've done that, we actually look into then the linkages and what needs to be done within those linkages. And so we develop priority zones, which are on the Central Forest Pine initiative. And from there, we look into spatial kind of analysis using GIS to kind of look into the status of those lands and what actually is going on in some of these areas. So we're kind of focusing a lot in Perak and focusing on PL2, which links up Belum and Temenggong. So these two forests are actually one of the biggest strongholds for the Malayan tiger. And so recently gazetted close to about 20,000 hectares worth of state land in the past was now gazetted and put into forest, back into forest reserve. And so what we are doing now is we're based right there and we're developing strategies to restore these degraded lands. We look into our conservation management plan takes on a level of degradedness from different IUCN kind of paper documents, looking at different stages. Stage 1 being the most intact, stage 5 being like bare earth and things. So we look into rapid assessment, we kind of develop kind of what needs to be done, and based on our localized adaptation calculations from our projects, we kind of put a figure on what needs to be done. And some of the areas, this will be a stage 5, sand and basically bare soil and grasses, which trees will take a very long time to reestablish on this area. So what needs to be done is really going on the ground using satellite information to develop your strategies on what needs to be done in these areas. And just to give you an idea, the different stages require different recommendations and different implementation stuff. So if the area is just has a lot of parent trees, you just need to basically enforce the area, make sure there's no fires, there's no degradation, there's no encroachment. All you need is as little as 5,000 per hectare to manage that. And it goes up all the way up to close to 100,000 per hectare if you're looking at reintroducing soil, enrichment planting, and getting a nursing canopy up. So these are the costs of what it needs to be kind of done. And these vary depending on how remote some of these areas are. And how long the duration of these projects are. Which brings us to where we then are based. So we're based in Sabah, which is in Lahad Datu. And I know there's a lot of students from UMS are on this. Welcome. And we also are based in Perak, close to the Manjaya Forest Reserve, in the Manjaya Forest Reserve. And really, we need to start off by getting a lot of seed stocks. These are the most, the tree supplies, the diversity of trees that we collect and have in this place. In order to regenerate a forest to its maximum capacity, we need 300 to about 400 different species per hectare. And so what we're doing right now is just focusing on the most threatened species. But to do it well, you need this large amount of diversity, and you need to make sure that you're taking into account provenance of these trees. You need to be taking account seed availability. So a lot of times when we do start up these nurseries, we're starting up from really scratch. These sites are really just nothing and degraded lands. And what we're doing is we taking up to 5 to 7 years to just get seedling materials. And this is our site in Perak, in Banon, where it was our most recent nursery that we got started up. So with that, there's a lot of opportunities, as you've seen. There's a lot of people also assisting. So thanks to all the funders, supporters, collaborators, and different partners on the ground. it's not that simple getting trees planted and getting the correct restoration materials for these restoration initiatives. The best way, of course, is to save the forest intact as it is. But if there's, as you've seen, a lot of areas are degraded, so we need to develop restoration strategies for all these areas. So with that said, thank you so much for listening. Over to you, Baida.
I hope I'm not frozen, so I hope everybody can hear me now. Thank you, Zaiman. Those first slides of yours that illustrate so painfully that Malaysia is still a major contributor to deforestation is very upsetting. You're doing such valuable work, but I have to ask you, are you overall hopeful about our forests, or are you struggling to find hope?
Yeah, I'm quite hopeful because a lot of times these forests remain gazetted as forests. They might be degraded, but they are still capable of holding large amount of diversity. What you lose a lot is the biomass, but the capability for that forest to regenerate is still there if you do not degrade it over 2 to 3 times. If it's just 1 or 2 times, it's solid. So the biggest thing is connectivity and basically level of do not convert, basically. Keep it connected.
Keep protecting it. Yeah, keep it connected, keep it protected. So thank you so much for that. I'd now like to invite Sophia to join us back again for question and answer time. So the audience, if you do have any burning questions, please do type them in the chat box. There are already a few appearing. In fact, the first question is for you, Sophia. It's from Tom. He asks, if we have so much in the way of resources, is there any way of extracting value from this rather than destroying it through development?
This is an excellent question. And this is what I've been pushing for 2 years now. There is obviously a way to extracting value from this, which is basically carbon credits. So we need to there's substantial carbon stored in the ecosystems. Some ecosystems more than others. For example, mangroves have much more carbon stored than the rainforest. But the rainforest has many other ecosystem services. First, we need to quantify the ecosystem services and obtain carbon credits for carbon stored in mangrove forests, and then exchange in global market, basically. So what does this mean? This means that other countries in the world will be able to pay Malaysia, and I've done some preliminary calculations, and it's in the order of many millions per year, many $1 million per year, for the carbon stored in these ecosystems to remain stored. Basically, that's the way. That's the best way to do it, and to safeguard the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's interesting thought, and it kind of leads into this next question that we have, which is directed to Zaiman. It's from Z. She asks, how can laymen like us contribute to forest restoration? Considering your table of costs, it would be amazing to crowdfund from the community. So this is probably just a different way of looking at carbon credits. So looking at crowdfunding from the community as a tool to raise awareness. We are so separated from these forest areas, so such initiatives should definitely be socialized to the general population. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's definitely a good way to crowdsourcing is actually a really good way to develop this project. So, what we're doing right now is working with different tech partners out there, developing apps that can receive funds and also then get our projects to then plant them out and document it easier. The biggest thing that we find by crowdsourcing and things like this is keeping the funds rolling. So in order to set up these kind of projects, the funds need to be kind of ever rolling. So it's kind of like you can have a one-off kind of targets and you can have one-off kind of place, but if you want to keep on that momentum, keep a professional team, build up the momentum, you got to keep it rolling. So we're working with some technology partners and hopefully we can launch the app quite soon, or the partnership quite soon, where we can then have individuals then contributing per tree and things like this, and then we then collect it in a certain amount of time, and then we then plant them out. So we are definitely thinking about that. We did it in the past and it was very manual about 5 years ago. We're a little bit too ahead of times, but right now with a lot of technology coming into place, we can do it quite easily. So soon to be.
That sounds very exciting. Yes, very, very exciting. We'll have to have another webinar just on that one. Yeah. All right, one more question for Sophie. This is from Melanie. She asks, in what way is the pandemic today related or caused by climate change?
Okay, the pandemic is not directly caused by climate change. The pandemic is a result of the same causes, of the same mechanisms that lead to climate change. The pandemic is a result of deforestation and encroachment of of wildlife. We are not supposed, we human beings are not supposed to be exposed to certain types of wildlife, because that's how diseases are spread. So basically, this is a major contribution to climate change is deforestation. And deforestation is also a major contributor to the pandemic. And again, we can expect, understanding the Earth global system means that the first major crisis we will face are going to be biosphere related. We can expect to have surprises, more surprises like this coming up.
And climate change is scary enough without another pandemic looming over us. The next question I will direct for Simon here is from Karen. She asked, the work that you and your team do is important. How closely do you work with the forestry department? And if not, what are the challenges faced there?
Yeah. So we work very closely with the forestry department. They own the land which we are working on. We have long-term lease over these lands, and in order to develop new restoration priority areas, we always get consent and develop a long-term partnership within the states that we work in. The question about what are the challenges faced? A lot of times, these states which are having the land, they develop the state budgets a lot of times come from land use, so mining, forestry, and all that stuff. What we really need to do is try to look for alternatives for states to receive funding in order to them to then reduce the pressure on the land. Another way is, find solutions. What we're looking at is looking for how, like what Sophia mentioned, how forests can provide services for not only Malaysia but for the entire globe, and how we can then receive funds in order to protect and restore forests. So if the forestry department and if states can see that as an income, we could really switch over very quickly. But we need to have a system in place in order to move forward.
Yeah. So that actually leads on to the next question from Dr. Kriban for Sophia. He was asking about if you could develop on that idea that you mentioned about 50% of GDP depending on high functioning biodiversity. Has Think City done any work on that yet?
We have done some work in estimation of ecosystem services. But the main thing here, let me just maybe step back for a bit. When we think about GDP, we're just thinking about the activities produced that lead to economic activity. But most of these activities are based on natural activities to which no cost is attributed. But to give an example, fisheries. What are the costs allocated to fisheries? There's no cost allocated to the healthy to the health of the ecosystems of the natural healthy oceans, right? There's no cost attributed to the biodiversity of a healthy ocean ecosystem or fisheries. It's just taking the human approach is just taking ripping the resources at no cost whatsoever. And this is when you add the nature component, you get that all human and animal feeding processes are completely relying on biodiversity, either directly, as in fisheries, or indirectly in agriculture with pollinators. Then forestry is incredibly important for not only the primary sector. So I would say the primary sector is almost all except mining, depending 100% depending on a healthy biodiversity. Then the secondary and the third sectors are still related to biodiversity, but not as directly as the primary sector. It's when we think about everything we do in our daily lives, what is cotton? Cotton. Everything we do is somehow related to services that both animal and vegetable species are providing us with at this very moment. And we are not at all, not even acknowledging them.
We don't think on the scale of ecology when we go and buy something, do we?
Yeah.
Well, this leads on to another question I have for you, Simon, also from Dr. Kriban. He mentioned your work that's ongoing in Perak State in relation to the Central Forest Spine, and he asked if you can reflect on the ongoing threats of degazettement of green lungs in the Klang Valley, which we are having to deal with, and does this suggest a real mismatch in national policy?
Yeah, so our national policies, we have different national policies depending on which one you're referring to. But one way or another, I think what is important is that we get ourselves educated on which policies we want to kind of push for our MPs. We want to push for our representatives to fight for. So having that knowledge is very important. Unfortunately, a lot of times it's really stuck within academia or stuck within paperwork and things like this. What we need to do is actually communicate on this really well. So, getting that information communicated to people and having them know where these areas are and what sort of status they are is very important. So as much as possible, FOBK, all the kind of community managed forests and stuff, this you guys need to know what land you guys are sitting on, what does that mean, and if anything happens in terms of encroachment and things like this, you can remind your elected officials that this is going on and remind them that we won't be happy if you're not complying to these based on the facts. And so getting yourself up to date with the facts is very important. Yeah.
There's still very much a huge body of work for civil society organizations to do in that landscape.
Very much, yeah.
I've got a question. Yeah, I've got a question from youth in our group today that we should pay attention to. So for anyone who would like to take on this question from Janet, she says, this question might seem totally off, but how can I involve my school in the climate emergency that we're facing? I'm from a public secondary school.
Oh, this is very, very nice. Hi, Janet. Welcome to Climate Action. You are most welcome. Actually, youth plays a huge role in climate. You can get involved. You can get involved with either Klima or the Malaysian Youth Delegation. So you can create a delegation in your school connecting with these youth Malaysian organizations and get actively involved in specific campaigns. It's always good to start slow, to get a feel of what you can do, and maybe start with a specific cause. If you identify something in the proximity of your school or in your city, you can initiate a campaign yourself and bring others on board. What do you think about that?
I think that sounds pretty good. And you can also come and get some training at Free Tree Society as well. So we've got a question. There's a lot more questions coming, guys. So I hope you're ready for a lot more questions to come. This one's from Leon, and I'm going to direct this one to Zaiman because we were talking about this earlier. It is, how would one compare the impact of large durian plantations relative to current known impacts of large-scale oil palm plantations?
Yeah. So oil palm plantations kind of now have a lot of regulations on what they can and cannot do in terms of where they can occur on, what sort of slopes they can go on, the MPOBs, MPOCs, the different palm oil councils, and international mills which are buying palm oil from some of these sourced areas, all put out some really good jurisdiction over what you can and cannot do nowadays. Whereas durian seems to be uncontrolled right now. So it's small enough that it can kind of like slowly expand. And what is happening is because it's also a tree, you find permits given being allowed to carry out durians within forest-related designated land. And so because they're not actively harvest all the time, you don't need such large machinery to bring some of these durians out all the time. What we see is that some of these durians plantations are also taking over on very steep slopes, which palm oil doesn't take. So they're moving into a niche of forest which are previously protected by their sheer steepness, and right now is opened up to a new crop which has not been regulated. So I think we will see in the future a lot of backlash if this continues. It will slowly be seen. Obviously, with the maps that we have recently showed, you can really see some of these happening on large scale. So if this goes uncontrolled, we will need the government to step in to create some sort of stronger regulations on what can and cannot be done, and the public can raise that as well. Yeah.
Perhaps it's probably best to nip that in the bud and already start voicing those concerns, perhaps, and maybe not eat so much durian in the meantime. Am I allowed to say that? All right, let's move on to the next question. This one's from Juwita to Zaiman. Also, the climate crisis will likely bring about forest fires that often cause devastating biodiversity loss to the affected forests. Does Malaysia have a program to manage forest fires of such a large scale?
Yeah, so our kind of like lowland forests are quite intact, and if you do not degrade them to such a scale, they very rarely get catch on fire. But what happens is if you develop into plantation, you have exotic plantations such as acacia that is used for pulp and paper. These trees are used to fires in their natural habitats, and so and drought in their natural habitats. So what happened is that these trees often lose all their leaves, have a lot of fuel material, and during the big droughts and can come on fire. It's the sheer structure of our natural forest, having all those different layers, the canopy, the subcanopy, the shrub area all the way to the bottom, which can then retain some of the moisture during big major droughts. So when that is lost, then we will start to find fires coming up, and a lot of times fires happen within areas which are totally degraded, plantation areas. Those come under the management of companies normally that are managing these areas, and they would have a program to mitigate for sure.
If I may I just add one piece of information? It's not it's not inevitable that forest fires are going to increase. Actually, there has been an increase of absolute volume of rainfall in Malaysia. It's not only the changes in weather patterns, but in the past 40 years, the absolute volume of rainfall has increased 15%. And this is the trend in the last United in Science report, 2020, which is the intermediate report, the intermediate annual report by the IPPC. They still say that this area in the world is going to see an increase of rainfall. And this is not the same as South America. South America is going to see a substantial decrease in rainfall. So these forest fires are going to happen in South America much more than in Southeast Asia.
Yeah. And actually, some of the most degraded areas, such as the peatlands, have actually really suffered from forest fires, especially when you clear it and drain it, because it's kind of like high biomass and that is kind of warming up and heating up. Those areas can really burn quite easily and quite it release a lot of carbon within the atmosphere. And these are sometimes quite deep peat, so going up to 20 meters or so. And so you can imagine just smoldering kind of smoke without actual flame, and it's extremely difficult to put out with water. You need to actually flood the whole basin again if you want to kind of put out some of these fires. Just to give you some stats, for example, the last one that happened, the last big fires which were happening in Indonesia, I can't remember, 4 years ago or so, that produced within the 4 or 5 months of it burning, produced as much carbon as the entire country of Germany in terms of emission.
Exactly.
So huge contributors. So it's quite
I think
scary.
we're all quite familiar with the effects of the peat fires here in Malaysia with those the yearly haze. Yeah. So that will jump us into the next question. We are actually over time. Are you guys happy to continue for maybe another 2 more questions each? Is that all right?
Okay.
Okay, so the next question was, which government bodies or units matter most in the protection of our forests, and what can we do to improve their effectiveness to safeguard our forests?
So the major one is the Ministry of Natural Resources, which is within the federal government, which then has the Ministry of the Forestry Department, which is which is under that ministry. So that would be the main government agencies that are managing forests. But a lot of times, what happens is you got forested land outside of forest reserves, and so that falls under kind of alienated state lands and things like this. What I recommend to do if you want to kind of look up on some of these areas is check out Global Forest Watch, which I showed in the third slide. And there's very interactive maps. You can actually look in boundaries. You can look at forest cover change. You can also sign up for alert systems, which showcase that any encroachment going on in some of these forested areas. So more and more technology are being quite available to people, everyday people to use, and it's quite interesting to play around with those maps. So do check it out, Global Forest Watch, it's called. But yeah, hope that answers your question.
That's well done. Okay, and one last final question, which I skipped earlier. So this one was from Morgan. She said, I am aware that during the massive pandemic lockdown around the world, new reports to a comeback in nature, such as clearer rivers and cleaner air. Do you think we can improvise the lockdown activities and adapt it in a way that can help the environment? Oh, that's a tricky question, I think.
That's very tricky. That's very tricky. I don't think people would willingly adopt these pandemic lockdowns, but definitely there's a lesson here, and there's a strong component that working from home at least once a week in the future, because we're seeing a shift in the work trends, right? Actually, I think City has adopted a mandatory work 1 day from home in order to reduce carbon emissions as well. So not only to improve the well-being of the family, well, that depends on the family, right? I hear that people with very young children are suffering a bit from lockdown, but once a week is quite nice, and reduces carbon emissions and improves well-being in general. So I think we can adopt some of these some of the good measures coming out of this, like working from home once a week or twice a week.
All right, that's a great answer, actually, and maybe we can think about flying a little bit less as well, even though we're all itching to fly somewhere as soon as lockdown is over. So we have run over time, but I think we do need to be respectful of everybody's schedule. So I'd like to stop the Q&A at this point and just ask our speakers maybe for a final word or thought to wrap up tonight's webinar. So maybe Sophia, ladies first, if you'd like to go.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to Friends of Bukit Kiara for the invite. And thank you for everyone attending, 53 people at 10 p.m. It's pretty good. I would say that let's all focus on the climate crisis and on the global Earth situation, because this is the biggest challenge we face currently. There's nothing that compares with this. And please search within everything that you can do. I see lots of students, lots of young people are trying to engage and asking us how to engage. There's lots of things everyone can do. So for the young people, you can, get in touch with one of the youth organizations in Malaysia, CLIMA, or Malaysian Youth Delegation. For older people, there's always a way to act, to show your commitment to planet Earth. So, thank you very much.
Thanks, Sophia. And a final word from you, Simon?
Yeah, thanks again for FOPK for having us here. It's really good to see a community kind of led initiative. I think what we need to do is all come together and try to find solutions in what we do, and like what Sophia mentioned was very true. You can reach out to a lot of your local organizations which are really doing lots of good things. It's just all about searching online, looking on the web, and try to find out who's doing what where, and making your impact as local as possible, with obviously thinking about the big picture in mind. Yeah, so do get in touch with all of us. So follow us on Facebook and Instagram and whatnot. We're not on Twitter, but yeah, do follow us, and there's always opportunity to get involved in some of these days. Yeah.
Thank you, both of you, once again for presenting your insights and also for the wonderful discourse. And good night to both of you. Bye. So for everybody else, we'd like to have one more word of thanks that goes to Tenaga Nasional for sponsoring this week's Restore Our Earth event. That was all about creating awareness and inspiring our community into action together. Finally, a treat for all the viewers tonight is from the Habitat Penang Hill. It is an iconic forested park right at the top of Penang Hill, where you can enjoy the cool forest air and breathtaking views of the island. So every visit helps to channel funds to the Habitat Foundation, which is working to conserve biodiversity in Malaysia and beyond. So as a thank you for joining us, Habitat Penang Hill is offering all participants a 30% discount for entry, which you can download from the chat, I think. This voucher lasts until 30th December 2021, so don't worry about not being able to use it now. Just want to make sure. Yep. So as a so we will now share a short video on what's in store if you would like to visit Habitat Penang Hill. But before we hit play, I will say good night and thank you once again for joining tonight's talk. Good night, everyone.